Hey, welcome to my bookshelf. Today I'll be doing my November wrap-up video, and I am proud to say that I finished 8 books this month, though admittedly 4 of those books were under 200 pages. So I read 8 books, but not necessarily as impressive as it could have been. But either way, I am really proud of the books I have read, and because there are a lot of books, I'm just going to jump into them and not doing any statistics, and maybe you don't really care about that anyway. So let's just jump into the books themselves. So the first book that I read this month is Charlie and the Chocolate Factory by Roald Dahl. And I actually did a whole Throwback Thursday video dedicated to this book, so if you want to know all my thoughts and feelings and the process of reading it and like the pictures inside of here, go check out that video. I had a lot of fun making that actually, though didn't necessarily enjoy reading this book when I think about it like critically. So I gave this like 2 stars. I'm not sure what I gave it on that video. I might have changed it since then. I might have said 3 stars and now I'm saying 2. And really now, like, all of these ratings are based off of like the Goodreads, where they tell you like, 1 star is I hated it, didn't like it at all. 2 stars is it was okay. 3 stars is I liked it. 4 stars really liked it. 5 I loved it. So just for clarification. So I'm giving this 2 stars because it was okay. The problem was it is really similar to both movies. And the things that are different aren't that different, and it really doesn't matter that much, to be honest. And I'm noticing this because there's another book that I read that was also a children's book, and I had the same problem, is that I feel kind of bad rating them low because they were doing what they're trying to do. And so I'm kind of almost rating them unfairly. I'm almost like comparing them to adult books, which doesn't, like I said, seem fair. This book is a good kids' books, I guess. It wouldn't be like an amazing children's book, but it's not like horrible or anything like that. Like, it's enjoyable. Yeah, so the problem is like it is really fast paced and you really don't get that much depth, and it's just kind of this fun, happy-go-lucky book, and there really isn't a whole lot to it. It's just very simple, which again, like all those things, like it's meant to be because it's aimed at children. So I'm just not like its target demographic. So I feel bad giving it a 2 star, but it's my rating and I will give it what I feel, but I do feel a little bad about that. So I just want to give you like a disclaimer, like I don't think that like this is a bad book. If you are a kid or if you enjoy children's books, then you're probably going to enjoy this, especially if you're not familiar with the movies. It kind of fell flat to me a little bit just because of those things. So okay, the next book I read this month was the other children's book, and that is Number the Stars by Lois Lowry, and I gave this one 3 stars. But I would have given it more if, again, I was a child reading this. I would have given this probably like 5 stars, but as it is, I am not a child. Because it is a children's book, and because it's just so short, and we don't really get that much depth and development of our characters and the plot, all those kinds of things, like obviously my enjoyability went down, and that's not really a knock against the book. It's really just me realizing that children's book, like I maybe should just avoid like these kinds of children's books that are just, it's just too, I can't enjoy them as much. I don't know what to say. It's like too simple. I need something a little more complex. It's trying to tell you a very specific story, and it's trying to give you certain lessons and kind of some understanding about World War II, but it's only skimming the surface of everything. So if you're a child, I think this is a great introduction to these kinds of themes and to, the horrors of World War II without getting too gruesome or too dark. But as an adult, it was lacking. It's a good book, but just not for me. Moving right along, the next book I read is also probably not for my demographic, and that is I Love You, Ronnie. These are letters from former President Ronald Reagan to his wife Nancy, and they're really adorable, by the way. And these are like love letters. Like, he loves his wife. That much is very evident, and it's very heartwarming, and it makes me want to bring back this phenomenon of writing love letters to your loved ones. I think it's beautiful. But again, like I mentioned, I don't think that I'm their target demographic. And I say that because I think this is written for people who are very familiar with Ronald Reagan and his life and what he went through. it touches on biographical things that happened to him and historical things that happened to him and Nancy and things like that, but it only skims the surface as well. You're not really here for the details, you're just here for kind of how they relate to these letters and how the context of these letters is basically what's being explained. I should probably clarify, like, we have the letters and then we have Nancy writing about specific times in their lives that relate to that specific letter. Like, this was going on when he wrote this letter. But again, it's assuming that you already know these events happen and it's not going into any depth. And I need that depth because I honestly don't know about these events, not really. And I was reading a little bit about them in here and I wanted her to like keep going. Like, she just kind of almost teased me and I wanted to know more. But this isn't, you know, it isn't a biography really, and it really isn't a memoir either. It just kind of gives you a glimpse of some of the context of these letters so you can understand them a little bit better. But it really is just the letters, like it says, the letters of Ronald Reagan to Nancy Reagan. That's what this book is. And I think if you go into it with that, you know, it is what it is and you can enjoy it. But for me, even though it said that right here on this book, I wanted it to be so much more that it wasn't, unfortunately. So my enjoyment kind of went down. So I gave it like a 2 stars. Like, it's okay, but I didn't think it was that great. But again, I'm not the target demographic, so there's a lot of disappointment for that reason. All right, so the rest of these books I actually enjoyed. So let's talk about those. The first of which is The Gates by John Connolly. This is a little difficult to describe, but I shall do my best. Our main character, Sam Johnson, I think he's like 12. Either way, he's a child, more or less, preteen, if you will. And he kind of stumbles upon something happening. He witnesses these, you know, demons from hell, or the hell dimension, or I don't know what to call it. They're taking over the bodies of some neighbors, and their plan is to open the gates of hell and, you know, bring hell on earth, which obviously sounds horrifying, right? But this book is really funny, intentionally so. It's, I guess, a satire? I don't really know if that's really the right usage of that word. But either way, it's a really funny book, and even though it's a really dark topic, it does it in a light way. It reminds me a lot of Douglas Adams kind of humor. I really enjoyed this book. It's my kind of humor. It's silly, and it's just kind of fun. I just really enjoyed it. So yeah, that's the basic premise of the book. I really enjoyed it. Apparently it's the first book in a series. I'm excited to read more from John Connolly because I really enjoyed this book. And I gave it 4 stars. Alright, the next book that I read this month was actually my favorite book. I gave it 5 stars. It's The Kite Runner. If you haven't read it, you need to. It's a good book. Okay, let me describe this. So it's kind of broken into like 2 sections, if you will. Like, the first section kind of delves into this man's childhood. He's looking back and he's kind of telling us what happened to him as a child. And our main character, Amir, he grew up in Afghanistan in the 70s. His family was decently well off, and they had servants. And one of the servants was a boy his age. His name was Hassan. He's like the best person in the universe. He's just like life goals is to be like Hassan. Like, he's awesome. Amir is looking back on his life, and I'm not gonna say what happens, but something happens and Amir is he feels very guilty about it, and it's something that he basically just tries to avoid it, you know, the rest of his life. And you know, you can't really avoid these things for too long, you know, they always kind of resurface, even though you try to like repress it and put it down, you know, these things just keep coming up, these traumatic events. And so, you know, as an adult, at some point, you know, in the second half of the book, like, he's kind of forced to deal with his past. So it's a book about so many awesome themes that we can all relate to, and it's also really interesting because it's set in a place that I personally am not familiar with, so it's really cool for me to learn a little bit about this Afghani culture, especially like in the specific time period in the 70s and things like that. And it was just an amazingly told story, and it's really moving. It really, really is. I cried really hard, just gonna be honest. Very, very moving. And I think that this is a really important book for a lot of different reasons, and I highly recommend it. So pick up this book if you have not read it. And I will definitely be doing a book chat video on this at some point. I will just have to get my thoughts together to talk about it, but I definitely want to. So be on the lookout for that. Alright, and the next book that I read this month was And Then There Were None by Agatha Christie, and I will be posting a Throwback Thursday video for this next month. So obviously I filmed it already in November, so I'm kind of cheating, I feel bad, but by January I'll have read it, so it'll be matching up. So it won't be kind of all over the place like this. I apologize. But either way, this is a murder mystery if you don't know. Basic premise, not going to give away anything. 10 people are invited to this island, they start dying off. I really enjoyed this premise, but I gave this book 3 stars. And thankfully, I don't have to go into spoilers to really tell you why, which is good, because sometimes that's tricky, because it's like, I want to tell you, but I can't. But in this case, I can, because it doesn't spoil anything. Yeah, so like I said in the, synopsis, 10 people are invited to an island, okay? This is a really tricky thing as an author to do, and I don't think that Agatha Christie did it well, unfortunately. I don't think she was able to fully develop these characters. And I know that because when they started dying, I honestly didn't care. And I didn't experience this fear and terror of who was going to be next and things like that. That didn't really happen. And I think that's a problem, at least for me. I've said this time and time again, I'm a reader that enjoys the characters. I don't necessarily have to like them as a person, but I have to enjoy reading them as a character. I have to know a bit about them. There has to be some kind of development. But they seemed a little flat, and they were actually kind of difficult to tell apart from each other. I had to kind of write a cheat sheet for myself. It was just problematic in that aspect. So as a reader, it wasn't as enjoyable because I had to keep flipping through, who is this? What do they do? And even then, we don't really get that much about them. So, you get just 1 or 2 facts about them, and that's kind of just who they are. There's a little depth, some get more depth than others, but they're kind of one note, unfortunately. I will say what makes it even worse is that we're jumping between different perspectives. It was just difficult to follow because of that. So that's kind of my big qualm that really brought down my rating to 3 stars. So the premise was interesting, but I just don't think it was executed that well. Okay, the next book that I read this month was Think Like a Freak by the Stevens, Levitt, and Dubner. One of which is an economist, the other is a writer and journalist. So they team up to write these books. They've written a couple other books, Freakonomics and Super Freakonomics, and I sadly have not read those books. But from my understanding, those books kind of delve into specific problems, okay? And the book delves into different ways to approach this problem and kind of different ways to solve it and kind of what people have been trying to do, if that makes sense. So basically they're just trying to approach a problem in a different way and trying to kind of solve it in a novel way. And they kind of go through their reasoning, I'm assuming, and why they're doing what they're doing and how this is better than how everyone else has been thinking about it and things like that. This book basically gives you the tools to do this yourself. So this is kind of these are, I think there's 10. By the way, there's these key ideas of how to think critically like we do. And they explain the premise behind whatever they're talking about. They give you examples and stories and things to go along with it. So it really helps you understand what they're talking about. And I personally think it's really well written. It's very easy to read. And in a lot of ways, it's very simple, but it's really interesting. And it was just a really fun read, to be honest. So I gave this 4 stars, but I do think that I would recommend this book to everyone. I think everyone would benefit from learning how to think critically. And the last book I read this month was Out of the Silent Planet by C.S. Lewis, and this is the first book in a science fiction trilogy. I feel like there's different kinds of science fiction, and I'm fairly new to the science fiction genre, I'll be honest, but most of the science fiction I've read so far are more of what I would call straight science fiction, right? It's more heavy on the science part, right? And this is in the category that I would consider fantasy / science fiction. So yes, there is science fiction in here, but it feels more like a fantasy book, if that makes sense. That's kind of where my problem comes in, because fantasy isn't really my genre of choice, and I try to figure out why that is, and I think I've realized it. I think it's just because in fantasy books, like, you're inherently forced to give us lots of descriptions. It makes it tricky, at least for me, because I don't know what it is. There's something about when I read descriptions, even in books that are not fantasy, mind you, okay? So this is why I know it's a problem with me, okay? Anytime we have a description in a book, I read it and I'm like, I comprehend all the words, I know what we're talking about, but then when I try to visualize it in my mind's eye, it just doesn't happen. I have an image, but I know that it's wrong. I have a really hard time making it match up with the description, even though I understand every part of it. So something wrong with me with that. I don't really know what it is. But either way, so fantasy is kind of a problem because I have a hard time imagining what's really going on here in the descriptions, which is also why I don't think I like fighting scenes very much, because again, there's lots of descriptions of the action that is happening, and my mind's eye is having difficulty imagining this, and so the enjoyability just isn't there. I did enjoy this book. I thought it was interesting. Like I said, I tend to read more science-y science fiction instead of fantasy science fiction, so this felt kind of new to me. I don't know if you normally read science fiction, if that would feel new to you. Probably not, but I still enjoyed it. I think it's interesting. Our character, Ransom, which is a great name by the way, he kind of stumbles upon something and then he kind of ends up being put in a spaceship and sent to another planet. So he has not willingly agreed to go to this planet, and now he's kind of forced to be on it and kind of explore, if you will. So pretty straightforward premise, to be honest, but it's a really interesting exploration of this other world and what it might look like. And how we would be different from them and things like that. I think it was well done. I enjoyed it. I'm very curious to see what happens next in this trilogy. So yeah, I really enjoyed this book. I gave it 3 stars. It was good, but it could have been better, I guess. Alright, so those were all the books that I read in the month of November. Wow, there were a lot of them, but I think that overall I did a good job of reading a variety of books, not only in genre, but in like publication date. I had one written in 1938 and one written in 2014, and then the rest were kind of just like randomly sprawled throughout there. So kind of all over the place in that, which I feel good about. I think it was a good reading month, and I am proud of myself. Even if they are shorter books, I am proud that I read 8 books this month. And with that, I just want to, as always, thank you guys for watching this video, and until next time.